The turkey was already on someone else's table by the time I found a seat by the window at a diner on Elgin Street, and I remember thinking, this is fine. I kept telling myself that. This is fine. It wasn't fine. It was Thanksgiving, and I was 63 years old, sitting alone with a laminated menu I didn't need because I wasn't hungry. I'd ordered the soup because the waitress looked at me with that particular kind of pity that makes you want to order something just to give her a task. The soup came. I stirred it. I watched families come through the door in their coats and scarves, laughing about the cold, complaining about traffic. The way families do when they're together, and the inconveniences of life are just stories to tell later. My son had called me 4 days before. Not to invite me, to uninvite me. "Dad," he said. And there was something careful in his voice, something rehearsed. Vanessa and I talked, and we think it would just be better this year if we kept it small. Just us and her parents. I asked him what he meant by small. I don't know, Dad. Vanessa finds it stressful. You know how she is. I didn't push. I've never been the kind of man who pushes. My own father was like that. Quiet, proud, stubborn in his dignity, and I suppose I inherited it without asking. So I said fine. I said I understood. I said have a good holiday, son. And he said thanks, Dad, and we hung up. And I sat in my kitchen in Ottawa for a long time after that, looking at the phone on the counter like it might ring again and offer some kind of explanation. It didn't. My daughter lived in Vancouver. She'd moved there 7 years before for work, something in tech that I never fully understood but was proud of anyway. And we'd grown apart the way you do when the country is 4 times zones wide. She had her own life. She'd always been the independent one. I didn't expect her to fly home for Thanksgiving, and she didn't. So there I was. 63, retired from 31 years at the city planning office, my wife gone 3 years by then. Cancer, fast and cruel. And my son had just told me not to come home. The diner was called Heron's. It wasn't fancy. The kind of place with checkered placemats and a pie display case by the register, and a television in the corner playing the news on mute. I'd passed it 100 times on walks and never gone in. It smelled like coffee and fryer oil and something baking, and despite everything, it felt warmer than my apartment. I was on my 2nd cup of coffee when I heard the chair scrape. "Excuse me, are you on your own?" I looked up. A woman, maybe late 60s, reading glasses pushed up into silver hair, wearing a burgundy cardigan with a small enamel pin of a loon on the lapel. She was standing with a girl, maybe 12, who was holding a paper bag from a bakery. "My son's running late," the woman said, "and my granddaughter is very firm about not sitting at a table for 4 with only 2 people. Something about it being sad. She's an optimist." The girl looked mortified. "Grandma, it would be my pleasure," I said. Her name was Cecilia. Her granddaughter was Zoe, and she had opinions about everything. The hockey season, whether pumpkin pie was better than apple pie. "Apple," she said firmly, and I agreed. And the particular unfairness of being 12, which she explained in detail, while her grandmother and I talked about nothing important and everything comfortable. Her son arrived 20 minutes later. His name was Patrick, mid-30s, wearing a fleece vest, the kind of easy smile that makes you trust someone immediately. He apologized for being late, shook my hand, and when Cecilia explained I was on my own for Thanksgiving, he said, without hesitation, without that careful pausing people do when they're calculating the social cost of generosity, "Come have dinner with us. We've got too much food and a table that fits 8. I said no. Of course I said no. I said I couldn't impose. He said, "Sir, my mother made a 20-pound bird for 4 people. You'd be doing us a favor." Cecilia was already putting on her coat. I went. Their house was on a street in Westboro, older houses with big maples out front, most of the leaves down by then, piled along the curbs. It smelled like the diner had, but more spice, more warmth, more of the particular smell that houses have when people have lived in them long enough to leave something of themselves in the walls. Patrick's wife Heather met us at the door, and she had that same ease about her, that quality of making room without making a fuss about making room. We sat down to dinner at a table that did not fit 8. It fit 6, comfortably. But there was a leaf they kept in the garage, and Patrick got it, and Zoe helped set it, and I stood in the kitchen doorway while all of this happened, feeling like something I couldn't name. Welcome, I think. I felt welcome. After dinner, Cecilia and I did the dishes while Heather and Patrick put Zoe to bed. She'd objected loudly to this, citing the fact that she was almost 13 and the dishes weren't done. and Cecilia told me about her late husband, Gerald. 39 years they were married. She still bought two of everything at the grocery store by accident sometimes. She laughed when she said it, but her eyes did that thing eyes do. I told her about my wife, Elaine, how she used to fall asleep during every movie we ever watched, without exception, and then wake up at the end and ask what happened, and I'd tell her, and she'd always say, "I knew it," as if she'd been watching from some other frequency. Cecilia laughed. I laughed. It was the first time I'd laughed like that, easy, unguarded, since the funeral. I left at 9. Patrick walked me to the door and said, "We do Sunday dinners most weeks, if you ever want to come." He said it like it was simple, like it cost nothing. Maybe for him, it didn't. I thought about it the whole walk home. I went the next Sunday, and the Sunday after that. My son called me in February. "Dad, hey," the careful voice again. "How are you?" I said I was well. I meant it, which surprised me a little. "Good, good." A pause. "Listen, I wanted to. Vanessa and I are looking at refinancing the house, and with the rates right now, we're a bit stretched. We were wondering if you could help us out. Just a loan. We'd pay it back." I asked him how much. 30,000. I'd retired comfortably. Not rich, but the pension was solid, and we'd paid off the mortgage years before. He knew this. He'd always known this. I asked him when he'd thought about calling me, before he needed the money or after. "Dad, it's a fair question, son." He said it wasn't like that. He said Vanessa had been going through a lot, and she needed space, and he was just trying to manage everything. He said he missed me. He said it quickly, like an afterthought. I told him I needed to think about it. He said okay. He said he'd call next week. I sat with it. I talked to Cecilia about it. Not everything, just the shape of it. She listened the way she always listened, without filling the silence with opinions before you were finished. She said, "What does your gut tell you?" My gut said Fasun was a man I no longer entirely recognized. My gut said that 31 years of putting money into the college fund, and the swimming lessons and the hockey equipment and the first car, 31 years of showing up, had not, somewhere along the way, taught him that showing up was the thing, that the money was never the point, that Thanksgiving was never the point. I called him back and said I couldn't do it. I said I was sorry, but my own retirement savings weren't something I could risk, and a $30,000 loan at my age wasn't something I was in a position to offer. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I thought you'd help us." I said, "I thought you'd invite me to dinner." He hung up. Spring came, then summer. Patrick and Heather had a group of friends who gathered in the backyard on warm evenings. People my age, Cecilia's age, a few younger, and I became a fixture without quite noticing when it happened. Cecilia's neighbor Wynne started bringing his guitar. A couple named Louis and Petra brought sourdough every time, unfailingly. I started making my wife's rhubarb crisp, which Elaine had made every summer, and which I'd assumed I would never make again. Zoe told me I was her favorite old person. I told her that was because she only knew one. She said, "I know lots. You're just the best one." I carried that around for weeks. My son called twice more over the summer. Both times he needed something. Once it was advice about a contractor dispute that was really just him wanting me to validate a decision he'd already made. Once it was another, smaller request for money. I said no both times. Each conversation was polite and cold and efficient, like a transaction. We both knew what it was. My daughter called from Vancouver. She was getting married. His name was Ian, a geologist, and she said it shyly, in a way that made her sound 22 again, and I sat on my back steps in the August heat and felt something open up in my chest. She asked me if I was all right, and I said I was better than all right, which was true. And she said, "I can hear that, Dad," and I didn't know what I said or how I said it, but I was glad she could. The wedding was to be in September, here in Ottawa. Small, 50 people. She wanted it at a garden venue near the river. She asked me to walk her down the aisle, and I had to pretend there was something in my throat. My son called in September. He'd heard about the wedding. My daughter told him, apparently, in the brief and diplomatic way she managed everything. "Dad, we should talk," he said. "Before the wedding." I agreed. We met at a cafe on Bank Street, a Tuesday morning, gray sky outside, the kind of September day that's already thinking about October. He looked tired, older than I remembered him looking. There are moments when you see your children and realize time has been happening to them too, without your watching, and it catches you off guard. He said he wanted to apologize. He said, "Vanessa, and he had been going through a rough patch, and he hadn't handled things well. He said he knew the holiday thing had been hurtful, and he was sorry for that. I told him I appreciated that. He said, "I want us to start fresh." Really? I said I wanted that too. There was a pause where something might have been rebuilt or started. Then he said, "And I was hoping, for the wedding maybe we could talk to Dad, to you, about the money thing again. Vanessa thinks if we could get even 20,000. I set down my coffee cup. "That's not an apology," I said. "That's a preamble." He looked at me. "I love you," I said. "You're my son and I will love you for the rest of my life, and that is not negotiable. But I'm not a bank, and I'm not going to sit here and let you practice being sorry at me as a way to get somewhere else. That's not how this works." He didn't say anything. I left money on the table for the coffee. I put on my coat. I said, "I'll see you Saturday." The wedding was September 17th. The garden was still green, barely, with that last gasp effort September makes before it gives up. My daughter looked like her mother. I'm not being sentimental. She genuinely did. The angle of her face in the afternoon light, the particular way she held herself. It stopped me for a moment when she came around the corner, and I had to breathe. Cecilia was there. Patrick and Heather were there. Wynne was there. Louis and Petra were there. I'd asked my daughter months before if she minded my bringing people, and she'd said, and I heard it in her voice, that quiet understanding she has always had. "Dad, of course. Whoever your people are. My people." My son arrived with Vanessa, and they sat on the other side, and I watched him across the aisle during the ceremony. He was watching the garden, but once he looked toward my row. He saw Cecilia beside me. He saw Patrick and Heather. He saw Wynne and Louis and Petra. He saw a row of people laughing at something Zoe whispered to her grandmother. I wasn't watching to see his reaction, but I noticed it anyway, the slight pause, the recalculation behind his eyes. At the reception, he found me by the drink table. "You've made friends," he said. "I have," I said. "How long have you known them?" "Since Thanksgiving," I said. "The one you told me not to come home for." He was quiet for a moment. The string quartet was playing something I didn't recognize. My daughter was laughing with Ian on the other side of the garden, her hand in his, and she looked so easy in her happiness that it hurt in the best possible way. "I'm sorry, Dad," my son said, and this time I believed it. There was nothing after it, no ask, no preamble, just the words, standing on their own. "I know," I said. "I didn't give him $30,000. I didn't give him 20. I didn't take back those months of soup and Sunday dinners and a 12-year-old who said I was her favorite old person. You don't unmake the things that kept you going." But I put my hand on his shoulder for a moment. He was still my son. I went back to my table. Cecilia had saved my seat, which she always did. The candles were lit, and the garden was going gold in the late light, and my daughter was dancing her first dance with the geologist who loved her, and somewhere in the distance a Canada goose was making its particular argument with the sky. I picked up my wine glass. I'd spent a Thanksgiving alone in a diner on Elgin Street, and a stranger had pulled up a chair, and that was all it took. That was the whole hinge of it. Family isn't always the people who are supposed to love you. Sometimes it's the people who do.